Welcome to Lehto Files. I have an exciting show today. This is Jesse Beltran. He's a certified master hypnotist and the president of Mind Nexus. He's actually dedicated his career to uncovering the truth behind covert technologies, mind control, and the increasing reports of Havana Syndrome. So Jesse's expertise and investigations into the intersection of UAP, covert technologies, and human consciousness offer a unique perspective that really excites me. I'm very interested in what you have to say. And it sounds like you recently had an experience of your own that changed your mind. So welcome, Jesse.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure being on your show. And we always thank you for this platform because the message that we disseminate is very important, really, for the human species.
Chris Lehto, welcome to Lehto Files.
I'll just dive into it. My name is Jesse Beltran. I'm a retired firefighter paramedic from the city of Sacramento and here in the United States in California. I've been blessed to have many positions throughout my career. One of them being the president of an organization called the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies. I'm currently the president of Cosmic Clarity Connections, and Mind Nexus Live is our brand. How I got into this topic we're going to discuss today, which is the Havana Syndrome or anomalous health incidences, is I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hall, who is a board certified physician out of Texas. And I met him at a conference one time, and we were having a discussion about how he was seeing individuals who were coming to him and complaining about an unusual phenomenon. And this was in probably when I met him was in 2009, 2010, right around that era. And he said they would come to him and they would express hearing some strange sound, almost like a signal being transmitted. And it would be followed by symptoms that would include nausea, vomiting, vertigo, short-term, long-term memory loss, and electrical shocks to the extremities. And some of these individuals would complain about hearing like a radio station being transmitted to them. So they were actually hearing language. And he was doing on a very limited basis what is called a RF scan, which is a little device that checks for RF emissions within the ambient environment. And I said, well, why isn't anything being done about this? Why aren't they getting help? And he says, because if they went to their general practitioners and complained about these symptoms, they would automatically be labeled or diagnosed with some type of mental health disorder. And they would be placed on medication, and it would further re-victimize these individuals. So being a firefighter paramedic, and I've been involved in a lot of studies out in the field, I said, well, why don't we do something that will allow us to make these subjective complaints and turn them in something tangible that we can measure? So that's how the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies was formed. And we held a meeting and just did a broadcast for everyone. If you have these symptoms, please come to our meeting. I expected maybe a dozen or so, a handful of people, but 100 people showed up, standing room only. And as I went through the room, everyone had the exact same complaint and very, very little deviation. Now, it's not to say there weren't any individuals that had a mental issue going on, but 98% of the individuals that were coming to these meetings were very consistent. And so I decided, okay, now I can go ahead and move forward and let's do what we would call as a preliminary RF scan out in the field. So I held a meeting in Davis, California. And at that meeting, 300 people showed up to get scanned. And what was interesting about the data, it started to form a story, a picture. And what it was showing is that the ones who were most effective, highest in numbers, were Caucasian females, age 40, recently widowed, singled, or divorced, then it fell to Caucasian males, African-American females, African-American males, Asian females, Asian males, and it dwindled down in ethnicity from there. We did continue the testing through the Midwest, and we got the exact same results. And so in my mind, I'm going, wow, this is interesting. Is this some type of phenomenon happening to Caucasians primarily for some reason? And that stayed consistent until we got to Chicago. When we went to Chicago, it flipped a little bit, where the number one complainants were African Americans, then Caucasians, Asians, and it dwindled down from there. And that stayed consistent all the way to the East Coast of the United States with one anomaly. The anomaly was in Virginia. I was invited to see a group of folks that were all military subcontractors. And there was about 100 or so there. And they all had these same complaints. Okay. Now, I'm going to define a little bit to the audience what Havana Syndrome is. In 2016, the diplomats in Havana, Cuba, when our relations opened up a little, started to complain of an unusual phenomenon, an acute onset of this strange sound, some type of signal being transmitted to them, followed by nausea, headaches, vertigo, short-term, long-term memory loss, unusual shocks to the extremities, very consistent in what we were covering in 2009, 2010. Now, in March 8th of this year, the Department of Homeland Security held a hearing about the Havana Syndrome or anomalous health incidences. And the purpose of this meeting was mainly to get help for federal employees who were suffering from this. Now, initially, the United States didn't give this credence. They tried to push this off as a mental health disorder, some type of psychosis or mass hysteria event. At one point, they were even blaming it on crickets, the sound that they were hearing. But again, these diplomats were complaining the exact same symptoms that we were covering back in 2009 in the general population. What was interesting about this is the United States didn't jump on board until the diplomats in Canada were also complaining of these exact same symptoms. Now, giving testimony at this hearing was a gentleman by the name of retired Lieutenant Colonel Greg Egren. And Greg Egren gave testimony that this, in fact, is a real phenomenon, and it is happening to our federal employees here in the homeland and abroad, and it's happening to the best of our best. That means our top diplomats, the brightest minds, our top CIA agents, our top FBI agents, and it is currently happening to certain politicians here in Washington, D.C. Colonel Egren expressed that they believe that this is some type of directed energy weapon, some focused beam weapon. EMPs is what they call it. And they say it's only happening. They can only testify that it's happening to federal employees because they were asked the question, is this happening to civilians? And there was one of the witnesses there who was an attorney who said, if you look at his Twitter feed, there are a lot of civilians who are complaining about this, but they only address federal employees. We can testify that this most definitely has been happening for some time in the homeland and has been happening to civilians in masses. And so this is why the timing is right. I would not be coming forward had that hearing had not happened. We would have continued to do what we were doing in the background and gathering evidence. Okay. So I have been practicing hypnosis since early 2000. I became a certified master hypnotist with my diploma in hypnotherapy for a specific reason. I was noticing that those who were most affected by this phenomenon happened to be highly suggestible. Now, there are a couple of cases here I'm going to talk about. One of them is a gentleman by the name of Aaron Alexis. He was a U.S. soldier, and he had contacted me shortly before he did something horrible. He was complaining about these exact same symptoms. And I expressed to him that this is not a quick fix. This is going to be a long-term journey, because we have to start on the path of gathering evidence for him. And there's another case by the name of Myron May. Myron May was an attorney out of Florida, who also called me and was complaining about these exact same symptoms. Now, Aaron Alexis ended up killing 16 people at the Navy Yard over on the East Coast. Myron May ended up killing 3 people in the research department at the university there. Now, what happens initially when someone experiences this, you experience the fight or flight response. These 2 individuals, their makeup was they were fighters. So this is why they did what they did, which is not generally what most people do. Most people are the flight response. They're trying to figure out, oh my gosh, what is happening to me? This is so bizarre. They just can't put a finger on it because it is so highly unusual. Now, the reason I noticed that the people most affected had high suggestibility. And what I did is I started testing for suggestibility at that anomalous meeting where we had military subcontractors. And basically what I did is I asked everyone in there to raise their hands if they thought they were highly suggestible, and no one did, which I wasn't surprised, just because the makeup of the individuals. And then if I asked if you thought you were not suggestible, about 98% of them raised their hands. So what I did is I picked the most intimidating person. He was a very fit, good looking African-American male, 6'6", about 240, 50 pounds. And I had him stand in the middle of the room with me, and we were just having a conversation just like you and I. And before you know it, his hands were stuck together. He didn't know why. Everyone in the room, their jaws dropped. And basically what I did is I put him to sleep just by having a conversation, knowing how to utilize language in a way to get to someone's subconscious who is highly suggestible. Now, the purpose of this is why are we doing the RF scanning? And when we were doing the RF scanning is that we had a suspicion if there is a signal that is somehow being transmitted, that we should be able to detect something. Okay. And Colonel Egren said, this is a directed energy weapon. And does that technology exist? Most definitely. There was a classified case in the state of Florida where the Russians were doing this. And they actually caught one of the individuals, and they found a device in there that led them to believe that this was a directed energy weapon. Now, we had a theory. We said, why is there so many people being afflicted by this? And what makes them unique and when I say unique in the matter that they can hear the signal, they're receiving the signal, because they can be in a crowd of folks and no one else is hearing it, only that specific individual. Now, we use a little bit of common sense here. The logistics in pointing a directed energy weapon at so many of these individuals is a logistical nightmare, number one, and it's probably not financially sound. So we said then there must be a blanket signal that's being dispersed throughout our environment. And unfortunately, there's something internal with these individuals that allows them to receive this signal. Okay. Colonel Egren testified that this phenomenon is happening on every continent currently on the globe, with the exception of Antarctica. Now, I'm going to share what we're finding with the audience. I'm about to show you one of my earliest cases. And this is a woman who had been suffering from this for many, many years. And in 2019, I believe, we had her have a surgery. And this is what we're finding. I'm going to go ahead and show my screen here. So this young lady came up positive in our preliminary RF scans. And you'll notice here that this is the pathology report. And this was done, 2018, I'm sorry. And this is, they pulled out 3 specimens out of her.
Who is they when you say they?
The surgeon, the surgeon. We, basically when, I'm keeping redacting the physician's name, her facility, because we want them to continue to assist us. We have a couple of court cases that are making their way through, and we don't want them bombarded, um, by individuals who are basically skipping a protocol that we have that basically gives us a grand slam, when we're in court. And what you'll see here is this has all been under high magnification, and they're pulling out what are called biosensors. And this is what they look like to, in 2018. They're even smaller today, and we'll go into that. So this is a nanowire. This is actually, our bodies do not reject these biosensors. So you'll get, our tissues will overgrow on them. They come in different shapes and different types. They almost look like our natural tissues, but they're not, because they're so small today, and technology has advanced to such a point that, they can make them this small. So I'm going to show the audience where we were in 2019. So this is a Bob Boyce case. Bob Boyce was an inventor of a high efficiency engine. And what we're looking at here, this is actually a cancerous tumor. At the end of these tweezers is an RFID chip. Now, Bob, when I spoke to him on the phone, he had said, Jesse, I had just succumbed, that I was going to die from this cancer. Bob at the time had no idea why he had developed this cancer. Now, until one day he was in what's called a Faraday cage. And a Faraday cage is a grounded environment where signals don't come in and signals don't go out within a certain spectrum. And he was using an RF detector, just like we use in our preliminary scans. And the one accidentally went by his shoulder, and then it pinged. And so he thought that was odd, went and got an X-ray, and lo and behold, they found this microchip in the center of one of these tumors that were in Bob. Now, he had the surgery. I went to pathology, and I asked Bob, Bob, well, what happened to the chip? And he goes, it disappeared after pathology. So he was, nonetheless, that was not a highlight, because it would have been nice to have that initially. But he was happy that his cancer went into remission, but it came back very aggressively. So he went back into the Faraday cage, rescanned his person, and they found another one. And this time they were a little smarter. When they did this, they had a chain of custody, and when it was removed, they made sure that it didn't leave their site. And in other words, they made sure that they were able to obtain the serial numbers, and they were able to trace this microchip back to an NSA database.
No way.
Yes. So as they continued to try and sue, the NSA came back and said, this is a national security issue, and it's been stonewalled there. So he hasn't been able to make much progress on that. The next case I'm going to share with the audience is the Dave Larson case. Dave Larson was a politician out of Southern California, and he inadvertently started having very similar symptoms that we were discussing. Okay, so this is a Dave Larson case. Now, Dave Larson was experiencing very similar, all the symptoms that you've been describing throughout this interview. Now, notice
Can you say, sorry, what are actually the symptoms? Just the audio noise? Is there anything else negative?
Yeah. You'll get unusual body twitches, spasms, electrical shocks, just all kinds of ailments. And you think about this, you're human beings that work on, off of electrons, all our biochemistry is very electrical. And so when you start putting these biosensors, it wouldn't be unusual to all of a sudden have your arm go up, if it gets a signal, or have unusual twitches.
See.
So these are the kinds of symptoms that they were
Okay.
experiencing. So this here is a biosensor. Notice this was in late 2000s, early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. Look how small these are. That's the letter U on a penny. So about the size of 2 letters on a penny. They come in various shapes. This is another type of biosensor that was pulled out of him. And they pulled out over 10 of these in him. He sued, and his case was thrown out. And the reason his case was thrown out is because he had inadvertently participated in a experiment. The problem with this experiment is they did not give him full disclosure. Because if he had known that they were going to do this to him, I can guarantee you he would have never participated in this. Okay. Now, where are we today? The types of implants that are out there now, and the only reason I know this is because when I was in Virginia, I met with a couple of folks that had worked for the Pentagon. And the reason we were meeting with these folks is because they were high school friends with my wife. And he wanted to know why we were there. And I had already suspected that he was aware of it, but he did say, oh, what do they look like? We can tell you exactly when these were being used, depending on the style of the implant. He goes, but today, if you're implanted, you're SOL, you're not going to find these through traditional medicine because of their size. So an X-ray or an MRI scan are not going to find these biosensors. Just think about this back in the 2000, the Dave Larson case, how small they were then. Now they're nano sized. And just so you can get a perspective of what does that look like in my mind's eye, a nano is, you know what a millimeter is? It's 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter. That's how small these things are now. So this is what we're dealing with. So it was our position is that what is making these individuals special and how, unfortunately, and how they're receiving the signal is they have these implants in them. And that's where we are today. Now people say, wow, it sounds pretty sci-fi. So we have some documentation that was not meant to get out. And I am going to read this to the audience. Okay. So this is a court case that was filed in 2019. This is the Don DeVore case. This was filed in California, down in Los Angeles County. And she is a nurse for the Department of Corrections. She became a whistleblower, and they put her in this program. And during her lawsuit, she happened to come across some evidence, and this was an internal document. This is Exhibit 2 that was submitted in this lawsuit. And I'm going to read it to the audience, and this is why but it's very important that I read it. It's Intelli-connection, a security division of IBM. It says confidential, limited distribution only, level 9 communications. So this was only supposed to be at the warden level and maybe a few people beneath him. It says 2020 neural chip implant. The control of crime will be a paramount concern in the 21st century. We must be ready with our security products when the demand for them becomes popular. Our Research and Development Division has been in contact with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the California Department of Corrections, the Texas Department of Public Safety, and the Massachusetts Department of Corrections to run limited trials of the 2020 neural chip implant. We have established representatives of our interest in both management and institutional levels within these departments. So they're getting their own people hired in these organizations. Federal regulations do not yet permit testing of implants on prisoners, but we have entered into contractual agreements with privatized healthcare professionals and specified correctional personnel to do limited testing of our products. We have also had major success in privately owned sanitariums with implant technology. We need, however, to expand our testing to research how effective the 2020 neurochip implant performs in those identified as the most aggressive in our society. Limited testing has produced a number of results. In California, several prisoners were identified as members of the security threat group. They were brought to the health services unit. We are working on a device which will reduce that time by as much as 60%. The results of implants on 8 prisoners yielded the following results. Implants serve as a surveillance monitoring device into the threat group. Later in this document, you'll see that there is no such thing as privacy once these are in you. Everything you hear, see is being recorded. Implants disabled 2 subjects during an assault on a correctional staff. All they had to do was send a frequency to it and it incapacitated them. Universal side effects in all 8 test subjects revealed that when the implant was set at 116 megahertz, all subjects became lethargic and slept on an average of 18 to 22 hours per day. All subjects refused recreation. Obviously, if they're lethargic, they're not going to be doing these type of activities. 7 of the 8 subjects did not exercise at all. Each subject was monitored for aggressive activity, and during the test period, and the findings are conclusive that out of the 8 test subjects exhibited no aggression even when they were provoked. Each subject experienced only minor bleeding from the nose and ears 48 hours after the implant due to initial adjustment. Each subject had no knowledge of the implant for the test period, and each implant was retrieved under the guise of medical treatment. So they were doing this covertly. It should be noted that the test period was for less than 2 months. However, during the period, substantial data was gathered by our research and development team, which suggests that the implants exceeded expected results. One of the major concerns of the security and research and development team was that the test subject would discover the chemical imbalance during the initial adjustment period, and the test would have to be scrubbed. However, due to the advanced technological developments in the sedatives administered, the 48-hour adjustment period can be contributed to prescription medication given to the test subjects after the implant procedure. So they're deceiving them. So instead of them having these symptoms because a foreign body has been put into persons, they're blaming it on the drugs. One of the concerns raised by the R&D was the cause of the bleeding and how to eliminate that problem. Unexplained bleeding might cause the subject to inquire further about his routine visit to the infirmary or other healthcare facilities. The security windfall from the brief test period was enormous. Security officials now know several strategies employed by this threat group that facilitate the transmission of illegal drugs and weapons into their correctional facilities. One intelligence officer remarked that while they cannot use the information they have in a court of law, they now know who to watch and what outside connections they have. The prison at Soledad is now considering transferring 3 subjects to Vacaville, where we have ongoing implant research. Now, Vacaville is a mental health prison, for those of you who are not aware of that, and that's located in Vacaville, California. It says, our technicians have promised that they can do 3 2020 neurochip implants in less than an hour. Soledad officials hope to collect information from the trio to bring a 14-month investigation into drug trafficking by correctional officers to a close. Essentially, the implants make the unsuspecting prisoner, and here's where it's pretty scary, the unsuspecting prisoner a walking, talking recorder of every event he comes into contact with. There are only 5 intelligence officers and the Commissioner of Corrections who actually know the full scope of the implant testing. In Massachusetts, the Department of Corrections has already entered into high-level discussions about releasing certain offenders into the community, so let them go early. With the 2020 neurochip implants, our people are not altogether against the idea. However, attorneys for Intelli-connection have advised against implant technology outside strict control settings. Under the present governmental structure, our liability would be enormous. While we have a strong lobby in Congress and various state legislatures favoring our product, we must proceed with the utmost caution on uncontrolled use of the 2020 neural chip. If the chip were discovered in use, not authorized by law, and a procedure traced to us, we would not endure for long the resulting publicity and liability payments. I can continue, but that says it all in a nutshell about what we're dealing with. The problem is this is being distributed into everyday society now. This is why we're addressing this. We're on a campaign to educate everyone about Havana Syndrome or this AHI phenomenon. Why is this important? Now we're in the nanotech era. You can put literally thousands of these in the tip of a needle. Because people ask, how are they getting in individuals? And what's unique is that in our preliminary RF scan, you can take those complaining of the AHI phenomenon, superimpose their scans over each other. They're all exactly the same. You can take those from the military. Those are slightly different, but you can superimpose them over each other and they're all exactly the same. And I always wondered in our early infancy, why those who were incarcerated were coming up positive in certain locations and all the same, but different than the others. This was the smoking gun. Now, I had high-level officials in the Department of Corrections. I had meetings with them. And I'd ask, because Ronald Reagan, when he was governor, wanted to implant anyone who was ever incarcerated. But there was a lot of pushback from it. And I had got wind that they were doing white papers at privatized institutions. And so I would ask about it, and they would say, yeah, it's being done. And they would say, yeah, highly intelligent prisoners would start saying that they're starting to hear voices, people talking to them. And they didn't know why, but then they later found out it was this program that they were being exposed to. And they would always tell me they would deny it if they ever were questions about having this conversation with me. But now we have the smoking gun and we know exactly why they were experiencing what they were experiencing. And the thing is, the United States Air Force has been working on this phenomenon for quite some time. There's a document I'm about to share. It was declassified in November of 1994, and it's called the New World Vistas report. And this is a 222-page declassified document. This was given to me by a colleague who I trust very much. This was in 1995. He obtained this. And just so you can see which report this is. And we're going to go to page 89 of this report. I apologize for having to scroll through this. Let's see if I can get down there faster. And what this report is about to talk about is biological processes. Now, remember, this was released over 30 years ago. And this was the United States Air Force's brightest minds brought together to come up with a plan on how to keep the United States Air Force a superpower 50 years into the future. And here I am.
Implant everyone.
Well, you draw your conclusion after what I'm about to share with you. This is page 89, biological processes, and I've highlighted the important areas. And it goes, it appears likely that there are a number of physical agents that might actively but largely benignly interact or interfere with biological processes in an adversary. And prior to the mid-21st century, there will be a virtual explosion of knowledge in the field of neuroscience. We will have achieved a clear understanding of how a human brain works, how it really controls the various functions of the body, and how it can be manipulated both positively and negatively. One can envision the development of electromagnetic energy sources, the output of which can be pulsed, shaped, and focused, that can couple with the human body in a fashion that will allow one to prevent voluntary muscular movements. Remember the prisoners, control emotions, and thus actions, produce sleep, transmit suggestions, interfere with both short-term and long-term memory, produce an experience set, and delete an experience set. This will open the door for the development of some novel capabilities that can be used in armed conflict, in terrorist hostage situations, and in training. New weapons that offer the opportunity of control of an adversary without resorting to a lethal solution or collateral casualty can be developed around this concept. This would offer significant improvements in the capabilities of our special operation forces. Initial experimentation should be focused on the interaction of electromagnetic energy and the neuromuscular junctions involved in voluntary muscle control. Gets crazy. It would also appear possible to create high-fidelity speech in the human body, raising the possibility of covert suggestion and psychological direction. When a high-power microwave pulse in the gigahertz range strikes the human body, a very small temperature perturbation occurs. This is associated with the sudden expansion of the slightly heated tissues. This expansion is fast enough to produce an acoustic wave. If a pulse stream is used, it should be possible to create an internal acoustic field in the 5 to 15 kilohertz range, which is audible. Thus, it may be possible to talk to selected adversaries in a fashion that would be most disturbing to them. In comparison to the discussion in the paragraphs above, the concept of imprinting experience set is highly speculative, but nonetheless highly exciting. Modern electromagnetic scattering theory raises the prospect that the ultra-short pulse scattering through the human brain can result in reflective signals that can be used to construct a reliable estimate of degree of central nervous system arousal. The concept behind this remote EEG is to scatter off action potentials or ensembles of action potentials in major central nervous system tracts. Assuming we will understand how our skills are imprinted and recalled, it might be possible to take this concept one step further and duplicate an experience set in another individual. Now, this is where we're at today. We're in the midst of it. If we remember that Colonel Egren said that this is happening here on the homeland in every continent on our globe with the exception of Antarctica, they're taking out the best of our best. So that means once this happens to one of our elite personnel, you're completely taken out of commission. This technology has been worked on for some time. Now, who has it? We know that Russia has it, who's probably ahead of us in this technology. We know the United States has it. We know China.
How do you know? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So Russia, there's a gentleman by the name of Igor Smirnov. He was the original creator of being able to transmit sound into someone's head, bypassing their conscious faculties into the subconscious. And he said there was no defense of it. When he passed away, the United States purchased it from his wife through a company called SRS, and they paid almost $1 billion, just shy of $1 billion for the technology. The UK has this. I was fortunate when I was president of ISA Act, for short, the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies, to interview a gentleman by the name of Barry Trower. He was an agent for the UK. He was a microwave weapons specialist. And in that interview, which is posted at our YouTube channel, you can see that interview that was done almost 2 decades ago. In that, he talks about the UK having this ability and transmitting voices into people's head and getting them to do things that they wouldn't normally do was very easy to do. In fact, in that interview, you'll hear him say that the scientists thought it was a success when they got someone to commit suicide. And this is what generally happens. Colonel Egren testified that this is a slow kill. This technology is made to make someone look like they're crazy. And they're doing this to the best of our best. So this is why we know at least the superpowers do have this capability. The Chinese have been working on this technology. They're talking about neural weapons. You can do the research, and they're very, very big on this tech. So where are we at today? Why is this happening? I believe that back in 2000, 2009, 2010, we were in an experimental phase. Now, the United States is known for experimenting on its citizens. We can talk about the Tuskegee experiments where we were inflicting syphilis to African-American males and just letting it go rampant just to see what would happen. We've done LSD experiments to Johns in the San Francisco region. On and on. You can look throughout history. We're notorious for this. And in fact, Bill Clinton, when he was president, actually apologized to the Tuskegee experiment sufferers. And a lot of people lost their lives, but no compensation was ever given in any way, shape, or form. It was just, we're sorry. There is a Canadian psychiatrist by the name of Ewan Cameron, who in the early days was funded by the United States government to perform experiments to see whether or not you can erase the memories in a human brain and re-imprint it with false memories. And he would do techniques like electric shock therapy. He would induce them with drugs to give them long-term sleep. He would put a helmet over their heads. And then he would play a tape recorder with themes that would recycle over and over again. And he really messed people up. In fact, that lawsuit is still going on today. I was on a recent show where one of the litigants was suing for her father. This was done to him. Right now, the Canadian government is trying to say that the statute of limitations have exceeded. And so therefore they're trying to throw the lawsuit out. That was just a couple of weeks ago. But this is where we're at. And this is why it's important that everyone understands that this can happen to any one of us. This can happen to your children. This can happen to your mother, your father, your grandfather, your friends, everyone. No one is excluded from this happening. And now with the advent of nanotech, this is a serious issue. I was on an interview with probably one of the brightest people I've met in a long time. And it's called the Celestial Report. If you Google it, it's out there. Now, she shared something with me. She said in the early 2000s, under the rule of law, they redefined what human is. And I was wondering why, because as I shared all my evidence with her and what our work, she shared something with me. With this nanotechnology and today, and I've also pulled the research papers out that are out there, it is now self-replicating and self-assembling, and it can attach to the human DNA. In the research papers, it discloses that you can change a species within 6 generations. I found that fascinating. And she said that that is the ultimate agenda. Now, why? Well, what does that mean? If we are no longer defined as human, then you potentially have a scenario where these superpowers have a patent over you, or these corporations have a patent over you. What we are finding is each and every one of these implants can all be traced back to a biotech company, a corporation out there. And there's a video out there by the name of William Pollack, Dr. Greer, which is a very popular person right now in the UFO community. He did a personal interview with Pollack, and Pollack talked about working with this technology in Silicon Valley. And he said they were making these implants in the billions, and somehow they disappeared and no one knows where they went. But that's an interesting interview to watch, because it talks about in its early infancy, this has been a plan all along. Now, what does this mean? Well, we know that we're probably in an arms race right now. That's why we're seeing such a proliferation of this all over the globe, with the exception of Antarctica. And I'm curious about why not Antarctica. There is a gentleman who he claims he's a firefighter who works for Raytheon in the Antarctic. And he talks about these type of array systems that are out there that produce uh, faster than light communication. He claims that when it was turned on, it was the reason why the earthquakes in New Zealand happened. He said that was an accidental friendly fire episode. And he also says that this is where the voice of God weapon transmission is being transmitted from. This phenomenon where they hear these auditory sounds, there's several names for it. They call it the microwave auditory effect. They call it the V2K effect, the voice of God weapon. Now, recently, a gentleman who actually created this technology, his name was Dr. Robert Duncan. He was the author of a book on how to tame a demon and Project Soul Catchers. He did not know what they were going to use this for ultimately. He thought that this would be a great thing to enhance the human experience, to make a super soldier, so to speak, and enhance their intellect, enhance their physiologies, all kinds of things. This is what he envisioned. He had no idea that it would be used in this way. And he testified that we used this in Iraq when we were transmitting, or Afghanistan, we were transmitting the voice of Allah into their heads. And Allah was telling them to lay down their weapons and just give up. And this is why they were giving up by the hundreds. So this is real, this is here, and this is now. And the reason I'm on this agenda is the first line of defense is knowing. Because once you know that this exists, you then be able to start to protect yourself. And protecting yourself really involves being in tune to who your inner spirit is. You know what your true value system is. You know what your moral compass is. And it's important that you identify that early on and quickly, because if you ever get exposed to this, Dr. Duncan says, and he says there's no defense against it. He says they can get you to do whatever they want. So if you want to do a social engineering experiment, this is the perfect weapon. If you want to divide and conquer the masses in order to continue the chaos in politics, this is a perfect weapon. And this is where we're at today.
Wow, that's amazing, Jesse. So tons of information there. This is all the stuff that Roger Lear worked on, right? I know he collected many implants over the years. Did you look up to him, or did you use his work as a reference?
No, I didn't. Like I said, I stumbled upon this by accident, and I am familiar with Dr. Lear's work. I was recently on Coast to Coast, and that's why they wanted me to come on, because they say, well, you're the next guy to carry the baton. Well, that's not what I was looking to do. What I was looking to do, expose the truth, help these individuals who are suffering, because currently there are no resources whatsoever for any of these victims in the general population. There is zero. What happens is because the protocols right now, if you go to see your general practitioner, a psychologist, psychiatrist, they just check boxes. And as soon as you say you're hearing these strange sounds, you're automatically having psychosis, you're schizophrenic, you name it. So they re-victimize these people again. They can't do this anymore when we're pulling implants out of people. They just can't. And so this is why we're on this fight. So, how does the process work? Generally, we'll do an RF scan, a preliminary RF scan, which allows us to calibrate where you have to be at least 2 inches from the emission around a person. If they come up positive, Depending on how long they've had the symptoms. If it's been a long time, then we'll say get a panoramic X-ray, get an MRI scan, other areas of your body, because you may have larger technology in you. After that, then we have you get what is called a nonlinear junction scan. And a nonlinear junction scan is utilized because there are two types of implants, and the categories I'm going to talk about. There are the active. Those are the ones that are on 365 days a year, 24/7. Okay. And then there's the passive. The passive implants have to be activated by sending a frequency emission to it. Okay. And what it does, it'll send out an echo looking for ferrous material. So any type of metals or electronic type devices. And then if it detects that, an echo will be reflected back. And then it'll send out a third echo, and that'll locate and give us the location and frequency of that device and how it operates, a frequency range of what activates it. So a nonlinear junction scan would be something further on in the testing phase. Ultimately, and I was asked by some foreign government agencies early on to visit them in Europe so that I can test some of their diplomats and family members. And they wanted me to bring anyone who I felt may be victim to this, who came up positive in my preliminary scans. And they allowed me, I had to sign an NDA, but they took me to a research university, and they allowed me to use what is called an anechoic chamber. And an anechoic chamber is a very robust Faraday cage. It has these huge frequency spectrums that it blocks out, and they're millions and millions of dollars. And so what we did is we used controls, people who weren't victims, and we tested them in the anechoic chamber and got 0 frequency emissions. But what was interesting is those who came up positive in the preliminary scans did come up positive for frequency emissions in the anechoic chamber. It was at that point that we realized we can now say that this emission is coming from the person.
In a heavy duty, hardcore anechoic chamber.
Correct. Yeah.
I had a friend, a research partner, and he was actually investigating a local abductee case, a continuing family experiencer case. And he went down this route that you're talking about, where he actually found a World War II bunker and brought the woman down there and then tried to do an RF scan for the same reasons, trying to rule out any other sort of radio interference. And he ended up dropping the case. The whole thing was so strange. They had, terrible, basically being tortured, essentially, is what it sounded like, this poor family. And really the local community, all the people around them, just assumed they were crazy. Basically, that was the local, like you mentioned, anytime you talk about really the absurd, when you really talk about that, then it's very easy to write it off. So you were able
Yes.
to get the actual frequencies inside that anechoic chamber and confirm. When was this? When did that happen?
That would have been in 2012, 2013. We have and I'll leave you a link for you and your audiences to go to, where you can see all this material that I'm sharing is I'm giving it to everyone. And you can see our phase 3 report, and our phase 3 report is that particular individual case, which was tested in the anechoic chamber there.
And you mentioned the NSA, that one of these devices, the ID number, you were able to trace it to the NSA. Can you talk any
Correct.
more about that? I mean, do you think this is the NSA doing all this, or what is your impression?
Yeah, well, in that case, that would be between Bob Boyce and his attorneys. I was sharing what Bob Boyce had conveyed to me after looking at the evidence. Who is doing this? Here's what I can say to this day. We know that there are many corporations out there who are on this track and on this race. Obviously, we know Elon Musk is working with this brain chip. What people don't know is BlackRock probably has the most sophisticated brain chip out there. It can connect to 10,000 neurons in the brain. And what's interesting about that is, in order for it to work, it specifically says you have to inject the nanotech in you first. So the the nanotech, without getting people confused, as I mentioned earlier, it's self-replicating and self-assembling. But how they get it to do that is through electromagnetic pulses. So they can guide this stuff wherever they want in the human body just by setting a specific frequency to it, and it'll go past the blood-brain barrier. Okay, that's important. Interesting enough, the kid that attempted to assassinate Trump was in a BlackRock commercial in a classroom setting with them. And I find that fascinating. But Raytheon is working on this technology. Obviously IBM. And if we look throughout history, if we think about during the concentration camps, who developed the punch card system? It was IBM. So, and then we know, our military has vested interest in this technology, particularly if we're in an arms race. But if you're looking at, President Putin gave an interview to the Politico, and it was in regard to psychotronic weapons. And Putin says the first superpower to master psychotronic weapons will be the superpower to rule this planet. And so this is what we're dealing with.
Well, in Lou Elizondo's recent book, his only book, Imminent, he has photos of implants, or he mentioned it in the book, and then he went on video actually and showed implants. Did you look into those specific implants at all? Do you know?
I have not. And,
Okay.
and now that you mentioned that, I will. Because here's what I can say. I, I, I know that has been at the forefront, has been a very popular topic. And they talk about when this implant was being excised, that it seemed to want to have its own intellect, where it was trying to get away.
It could move, I guess. Yeah, they were saying.
Yeah,
from the
it can
side.
move. So my suspicion that this is probably a nanotech constructed membrane around the implant. As far as these implants being in alien nature, right now, I haven't seen any evidence of that. What I have seen is that these are all very similar to implants that we have seen being taken out of the human body that can be tracked to a biomedical company.
Have you named this biomedical company? Or
They're, all the medical company, all those agencies that I just mentioned are all working with this.
yeah,
Yeah. Yes.
wow. I mean, if true, it
So
breaks so many moral, ethical lines.
it is. It is. This is and this is why we're sharing this information, because this is really a fight for our species, for our existence. Now, if you remember, the Nuremberg Code is any experimentation must require full consent. Okay. And just by fact of that document for the prisoners, they're doing it covertly. Those prisoners, even though they're incarcerated, they have to be given full consent. Now, here's the thing. If you can manipulate, I can do it with my own voice because I'm trained and I know how to use language in a way that can bypass the conscious mind. But if you're using technology, basically what you and Cameron was doing is nothing. Now we have it on steroids, because you can transmit messages to these people. You can bypass their subconscious. And Dr. Duncan has a couple of presentations that he talks about that. You can get anyone to do anything that they wouldn't normally do. And if you get the right personality type, those who are highly suggestible, you can get them to do something like the Myron Mays, like the Aaron Alexis's, and not remember that they even did it. And this is where we're at today.
Well,
I have a special case I wanted to mention. In the last 20 years, we know what frequency spectrums we're looking for. We know because we've been doing this for so long. But recently had a case where he's a special forces, special ops guy. And he had an incident that he couldn't explain regarding loss of time. And then he started to get the unusual sounds. And so we said, I wonder. So I did a preliminary scan on him. He came up positive. So we sent him immediately to go get the nonlinear junction scan. And he came up positive in 6 locations with the nonlinear junction scan. What was interesting is the frequency that we were detecting was something we've never seen before. And so when we went to look up who had the least ownership on this particular frequency, I figured it was going to be the United States. And it wasn't. I had a hunch, so I started to look in Europe. And what we found is that frequency that's being emitted from his person is owned by NATO. Now, remember I talked about the celestial report. She talks about that, there is a strong push to have this one world government. On September 24th, prior to our retreat that we just had, the UN, there was a push to pass this treaty with the WHO. It didn't pass. So what they did is they passed a pact at the UN that would require that every living human on the planet would have this biosensor put in them. And she's saying that the United States in that pact, and we are part of that pact, would be giving away our sovereignty. And so, what does this mean? I don't know. NATO owns, on this particular soldier, owned the leasing on that frequency that was being emitted from his person. And Dr. Greer has a similar case of a special forces personnel who has a similar frequency. I was not aware that Dr. Greer was testing for these types of things, but it was brought to my attention that they do have a similar case. Now, when we talk about threat to our species, that's a different topic. That's about the nanotech and how the research papers say that they could change a species within 6 generations. There's at our retreat, there was a very talented lady. Her name is Dr. Rima LeBeau. She was married to General Stubblebine, and he's since passed. But it's her position that you can change a species within 1 generation. So this is why it's important that we get the message out. And there has to be some serious conversations on, what do we do about this? There has to be a point where this divide and conquer mentality has to stop. We are the masses, we are the ones with the power. So it's important that we wake up. It's important that we educate ourselves. It's important that we understand the implications of technology and how it's outpaced our laws. And then we have to come up with a solution on how we move forward. It's one thing if you choose to put this stuff in you, but it's your right. It's your choice. It's another thing if this is imposed upon you covertly against your will. And then how do we deal with that?
I just keep thinking, do you have a bunch of implants? Do you have the actual hard material? Because this seems like the best hard evidence that we could find, apart from a ship, right? If you're looking at actual,
I'll talk about that. Yeah. So I've always been of the position, this is all human intervention. Now, if you look at the New World Vistas report, you look at that IBM document that we've intercepted, you have to start to wonder. Now, remember, they can, and Dr. Duncan's work, they can imprint, they're talking about imprinting a memory set from one individual and then imprinting it in another. In the same token, they're talking about erasing memory sets. So when you talk about these abductions, so there's three categories. We have the UFO abduction category. We have the MyLab category, which is individuals who believe they were abducted by the military and implanted. And then you have this AHI Havana Syndrome phenomenon that's going on. So you have those three categories. Now, if they can imprint a memory set, imprint false memories, then you have to say, is this your abduction that? Is this my lab abduction that? Or is this something else? Or is it a combination of the two? I was expressing to you prior to us going on live is that I had an experience that was life-changing for me at this event we held in Tucson, Arizona.
Just a week ago, right? Or 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, just not too long. 2 weeks ago. Hadn't been too long ago. And I'm a hardcore skeptic. But I can say after what we experienced, I can no longer say that I'm a hardcore skeptic. I'm probably 90% saying, well, there is this unusual phenomenon that needs to be investigated further. And 10% me says, I'm saving that because I know what technology we are in possession of right now. And I know that there are certain patents out there, but what I experienced was, I was out the front of the facility, talking to my business partner, and then it was nighttime. He smoked cigarettes. I don't, but I was just joining him because we can have a smoke. And what flew in front of me was this white ball of light, and he's 2 feet in front of me, and it flew by, and I go, "Did you see that?" And he goes, "No, but I felt that." He goes, "What was that?" And I expressed to him what it was. I thought, well, that's interesting. And then later on in the evening, we had speakers there. We had psychiatrists. We had Dr. Alex Bloom there. We had physicians. We had Peter DiNucci, who was an airline pilot, and he trained tens of thousands of people over the human factors. And he wrote a book about the UFO phenomena. And so and a lot of this was new to me. I've only covered this topic of Havana Syndrome and implants over the last 2 decades. And we did what I guess something that I was never exposed to. I guess Dr. Greer does this, was a CA5 session. And again, I'm a skeptic. So my eyes are open the entire time watching to see are any tricksters around or anything like that. And lo and behold, 2 other witnesses go, "Wow, did you just see that?" And what we saw was a white orb in the sky burst into an outer ring of white light, and then it just disappeared. I go, "Wow, that was fascinating. What the heck was that?" Because my thought was, well, okay, maybe this meditation is inducing hypnosis, suggestions, but none of the planting of seeds was ever used in their meditation phase. So that's what I was being critical of. I was trying to see if that was the reason why people would have an experience. But I could deny that. So I thought that was very interesting. But when I was convinced that that I really had to open up my mind was the following morning. I don't sleep very much. I sleep maybe 2 to 3 hours a night. And so I was up at 4:45 in the morning and I made a cup of coffee, and it's Tucson, Arizona. It's really, really hot during the day, but at that time it's beautiful. And so there was a gravity chair out by a gazebo in the backyard of the facility. And I went there and I'm having my cup of coffee and I'm looking up in the sky and I see what I believe is a satellite. It's a white orb just flying very slowly across the sky, and I go, "Oh, that's gotta be a satellite," until it does this right angle turn very fast. Another right angle turn, and it zips off, gone. And I go, "Wow, that's really fascinating." I said, "Well, that must be what you call a UAP." And then 35 minutes later, a fleet of them flies by and then zips off. So it's, what was that experience? I have to say now that, prior to that, I was a hardcore skeptic. Very hardcore. You couldn't convince me otherwise. And what, where I'm at now is, okay, is this human or is this something else? In my mind, I'm wondering, is that some type of unmanned aerial vehicle of some sort that we have a technology that, that it isn't being exposed yet. So, but that's where I'm at. That's what my experience was.
Mm. Yeah, you hear about the Earth as a garden or a zoo. I think even Lou Alzondo's used that reference as a zoo before. And in that case, it feels like the humans, if they're the animals being tagged, this would be a great way to do it. Um, but it is interesting that they're using biosensors that we could detect, right? That they just happen to develop uh, better technology. Have you actually detected any of these actual nano? Does anyone have any evidence of nano engineered?
Well, it's interesting that you say that at this retreat that we just did. So typically I'm only engaging with people who are having symptoms. These are the type of personnel. And I've had all walks of life. So I've had attorneys, doctors, judges, blue collar workers, white collar workers all come to me. So it's the whole gamut. And, but they're always people with symptoms. During this, with one exception, I did have an event that I was invited to. It was a music mogul in California, and he heard about my work, and he just wanted me to scan his group. They were all business leaders. And in that, I was surprised because I didn't expect to find anything. And some of the people in the group were coming up positive, but only in 2 locations, the right arm and the left arm. Okay. There was a couple of anomalies, and one was in the knee and one was in the hip. I asked, did you have anything done there? And they had prior surgeries. So prior to that, I don't generally scan just what we would call the general population, people with no symptoms other than what's in Europe. And at this retreat, people were fascinated by my presentation and wanted to get scanned. And so I did do scanning, and there was one military subcontractor who came up positive in all the locations that we typically see someone who is a military subcontractor. It was one individual. The other individuals, not everyone, just a couple, I did get a positive reading in a very unusual location, which I don't typically see. And it was in the right torso where your lung is, or the left. And they were coming up positive in very, very focal locations in those areas. So it's a new data set. It's a new thing that I'll be watching, and we'll be collecting more data on that. Because I would like to do a campaign where we just start testing the general population, because now we're dealing with nano, and how can nano get in you? Obviously, injectables are the easiest way to do this. Ingestion and ingestion of this can be done. There was a study that was sent to me recently by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Lynn Bear. And it was a study regarding the lidocaine derivatives that you use when you go to the dentist. And it was interesting in the slides that they were showing, there were nanoparticles in there, but evenly dispersed throughout the slide. And when they exposed it to EMF, it would go into a square looking like a square chip. So, that is something new and very recent. And so that it's something that, we need to investigate and continue to look into that path.
Are these RF detectors, are they expensive? If someone in the audience wanted to test themselves or their friends or something, are these
Yeah.
expensive?
We use in the preliminary environment, we use what is called a JM20 Pro frequency detector. And if you get a positive reading there, then we use what is called an ASECO frequency counter, which will give us a numerical reading. Those generally you can get fairly inexpensively, in the way that we say a nice good one today would be around $500 to $600, and the frequency counters are $300 to $700 right in there. Where it gets expensive is the preliminary junction scanners. Those start off around 30,000 and go up as high as 100,000.
Oh. Oh, excellent. So you mentioned that you have all this documentation online. Where can people go to find out more information?
I will give you a link. I have a directory that's open to the public in my OneDrive, and you can see all this documentation in there.
Okay. Um, what and then I guess while we're running out of time here, what is your most interesting hypnosis therapy session or session, if you will? I'm assuming you've done hypnotherapy and looked into UAP encounters, etc.
Not the UAP
Or not?
encounters.
Okay.
No one has come to me as of yet with an abduction claim and want to be regressed.
Okay.
Um, I have had most recently, an unusual regression. Typically, people regress into human form, but up until recently, I've had two cases where they were not in human form. Um, uh, the most recent one you would say would be in some type of form that was not human. Um, um, a- and the fact that you would typically describe it as alien. The one part that I'm referring to is an individual. She uh, highly intuitive, sensitive, talks about having these um, dimensional, transdimensional interactions. And she regressed into what is called light form. That's the only way I can describe it, a light being. And that was unusual. What was really interesting is that we were filming this and we had others in the environment. And then the camera person just set the camera and left the room. But the whole room, when she was regressed to this light being, um, was electrified. Your hair on your arms was standing. In fact, everyone in the room could feel it. And when the camera person walked back in, that's first thing he says, "What's going on?" He feels this electricity going through his body. I found that to be fascinating. So what we want to do with this individual later is we want to have some other equipment out to see if we can recreate this phenomenon and see, like maybe with the FLIR spectrum analyzers and other devices that we can have in the room. So when we do that regression again, that was pretty fascinating.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jesse. Then thanks for your over a decade work into this topic. I know it's. I mean, only recently now can we even really talk about implants. On YouTube. I feel like even just a couple years ago, if I brought that up or did a show on it, I think I would receive serious stigma, et cetera. Whereas
Yeah.
now, after Lou's admission, we're hearing more and more information. It just seems like perfect timing. So thanks
Yeah.
for
And
thanks for coming on.
yeah, no problem. And once you have the evidence, it's hard to get censored. Um, as long as you're not talking about that special jab that everyone's getting, you can pretty much share it. And we try to do evidence-based presentations. Um, we will stay away from subjective theories. We won't share that unless we have the evidence to back it.
Okay. All right. Thanks again, Jesse. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me this platform.
Okay. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like button. Really helps the channel. Consider subscribing. And a special thanks to all my patrons on patreon.com/Chris Lehto. This trip to Hestelin could not be possible without them, as well as YouTube members. Thank you so much. And please consider helping the channel. Again, couldn't be possible without your support. And in November, I'll be going on The Transcendence of Consciousness, Ancient Egypt Uncovered with Nick Cook, JP Haig, Mohammed Ibrahim, and Ross Coulthart, actually. Thanks again to patrons. Could not do it without you guys. And I will give up to the date, real-time information on patreon.com/Chris Lehto. So again, please sign up. Thanks again. Have a great day. Peace.